This is going to be the follow-up, the part 2 of Dr. Anthony Chaffee. The first one was where he went into the plants, the negative side of plants. And this, we're going to dive into those benefits of meat, how we should be eating, even the MTHFR, which is something that's really important to me. And Dr. Chaffee really lays it out with a lot of interesting supporting facts. Help me now move to the proponents and kind of those big questions around carnivore, like what about the lack of fiber? What about the gut microbiome? What should we be eating as far as some sort of a hierarchy? Because, Dr. Chaffee, what we're trying to do is build out a localized, resilient food system that is nutrient dense. So we have to support agriculture in a way that provides food, right? That for our locale. So help me and address some of those concerns, the fiber, the microbiome, and the hierarchy of meats that, I'm in Central Arkansas. What can we focus on to have this prosperity diet, in your opinion?
So, well, obviously the issue with fiber is that it was never actually proven that it was any good for us in the first place. It was argued that we should have it in the 1980s because everyone started getting constipated and we started getting fat. And it was all about fat busters and all that sort of stuff because in 1977, the USDA declared that saturated fat and cholesterol cause heart disease. And the McGovern report came out and said the same thing. Problem with that is that the head of the USDA was actually on the payroll of the sugar companies, and he was bought and paid for, and he was paid to do that. So that was actually published in the Journal of the American Medical Association in 2016. They published actual internal memos from the sugar companies back in the 60s detailing how they paid off 3 Harvard professors to falsify data and publish fraudulent studies to make it appear as if cholesterol caused heart disease when it was really sugar, or was likely sugar. And there was studies showing that there was a strong correlation with sugar and heart disease. And then to say that sugar was safe, that was what they concluded in there. There was just an empty calorie in itself, it's no problem. And one of those professors, now they didn't disclose that, by the way. They never disclosed it, that was being funded by the sugar companies, which is illegal and unethical. One of those professors was named head of the USDA, and it was he who authored and published that 1977 USDA declaration. So we know that's fraud. We know that's con and bribery. So you throw it out. Anytime you have something like that, you just throw it out. You have something that's known fraud, you throw it out and you start over. But in the 1980s, we didn't know that at the time. And so people stopped eating fat. And it's like, oh, got to get rid of fat. Well, fat actually drives your digestion. Fat is actually what lubricates things and keeps your stool soft, is the excess fat that you can't absorb. And so now all of a sudden everyone's getting constipated. And they're also getting fat, by the way. People started gaining weight dramatically. The obesity rate was only around 8% in 1980, and it sort of increased dramatically after that. Now it's 42%. 100 years ago, it was 1.2%. Very, very, very low. So it dramatically rose after that report saying, don't eat fat, it makes you fat, gives you heart disease. Just the opposite. The heart disease rate has tripled since the 1980s. And some misleading people will try to mislead you and divert and say, well, the mortality rate, cardiovascular mortality rate, actually peaked in the 1960s and started going down after the 70s, right in time for these measures with cholesterol. That's not what we said. We said the rate of heart disease, that's gone up. People having first-time heart attacks is going up. It's just they're surviving because we have open heart surgery, we have bypass surgery, we have stenting, we have early detection. People are taking aspirin, they've stopped smoking. And so there are a lot of different things that we change, and we have better interventions. You can have a clot, we can send up a little wire up there, pull out that clot, put in a stent, and you don't die that day. And you don't die 6 months from now when your heart stops working because it's so damaged. Or you have a stroke and you can go up, pull that out, or give a clot busting drug, right? So we have better interventions now that save people's lives, but more people are having their first heart attack than they were in the 1980s, right? But we've reduced cholesterol. We've put on cholesterol-lowering medications. We've stopped eating meat. We've stopped smoking. We've started doing all these good things. Heart disease is going up. So we know that's wrong. But in the 80s, they didn't, and everyone's getting constipated. And I remember this as a kid, actually. They're saying, like, well, you should eat fiber because it's bulking and it works with your gut to use peristalsis and move things through. But why didn't we need that before 1986? You know? Did our just entire digestive tract as a species change while we were alive? I don't think so. So you never really needed fiber. And that was another argument they made for fiber, is that you should eat a lot of plants, you should eat a lot of vegetables because they have fiber, and so you don't have really any nutrition in it. It's just like eating a plastic bag. It has no calories, it has no nutrients, but it feels like you're full because it has bulk to it. And so that'll stretch out your stomach, it'll release a hormone called leptin, and your brain will say, oh, we're full, no problem. And there was something called the celery diet, which is funny because they said it actually takes more energy and more calories to process, digest, and pass celery than you actually get from the celery. So you can eat as much celery as you want, and you'll just have negative calories. You'll just be losing this. Never happened. Never worked. People were miserable. They were sick. They were bloated. They were hungry as hell and were not happy. And people were just getting fatter and fatter and sicker and sicker. So that was the argument with fiber. And since then, there have been a number of studies. Not all of them are great. I've read a lot of these things. I've had people say, well, what about this meta-analysis? And meta-analysis sounds really strong. But if you have a lot of really garbage studies that don't really show much, and you put them in a meta-analysis, it's garbage in, garbage out. You've put in a bunch of garbage, and then your result is going to be garbage as well. So none of these things are very high quality evidence. And some of these things they would show, like, well, it reduces blood pressure. And so I was like, okay. So I went through, had like 30 studies in this meta-analysis. I just went through, just 3 at random. They all had, they dropped blood pressure by like 1.2 points. It's like, okay, technically, yes, you've dropped blood pressure, but it's really not anything to write home about. You also have to think about what the mechanism of what fiber does in your body. You cannot break it down. No vertebrate animal can break down fiber. None. Herbivores that eat fiber, they actually cultivate bacteria that eat the fiber and actually produce as waste fat and protein. Right? We can't do that anymore, which is actually further evidence that we're not supposed to be eating it, because other animals can. Other primates can, like gorillas. Because gorillas just eat green leaves and they get all this protein. No. It's the bacteria. They can break down fiber with their bacteria, and they absorb fat and protein. We can't do that. We need to eat the gorilla and get his fat and protein, right? That's how we survive. And so when you eat fiber, you can't really do anything with it. It actually forms a lattice and it actually form barrier protection. It can actually stop you from absorbing about 30% of what you're eating. Okay, well, if you're eating a lot of high octane crap and a lot of processed foods and sugars and carbs and other sorts of plant toxins that aren't great for you, sure, reducing that by 30% is a great idea, right? But if you're eating that with meat, which is nearly 100% bioavailable, perfect nutrition, no toxins, you don't want that. You don't want to delay that. And there are other things in plants that actually delay, that stop you from absorbing things and binding nutrients, blocking your enzymes to break things down and so on. But just with fiber, it's never really been shown convincingly that this is something that's actually good for us. It's been pretty garbage studies that have shown maybe a bit of help, but when compared to eating a standard American diet, which is by all accounts garbage. And so if you're reducing your absorption of that garbage, you get an improvement. Great. They're not doing that with people like myself who aren't eating fiber because they're only eating meat, and you don't need fiber. So I don't think it's going to cause an improvement for me. Now, there are other studies that have shown in people that were symptomatically constipated, had painful bloating, bleeding when they passed stools, and just difficult symptomatic constipation. They took them and they split them up into 4 groups. They said, okay, you keep eating the same amount of fiber, you increase fiber, you decrease fiber, and you guys eliminate fiber completely. And the results were the opposite of what everyone would have guessed, which is people who stayed the same, and people who increased fiber actually got worse. People who reduced fiber got better. People who eliminated fiber completely resolved their symptoms, completely. Okay, and there are studies with Crohn's and ulcerative colitis showing that if you remove carbohydrates and fiber, you can keep people in remission up to 51 months without medication, just by removing fiber and carbohydrates. So is it the carbohydrates? Is it the fiber? Is it something that comes with both? Don't really know, but that's an interesting study. And the list goes on. There's actually a study with over 2,000 patients that actually was shown that the people, the high fiber group, actually died more often of heart disease. Don't know what the mechanism there is, but that's the association. So that's 2,000 people, and that is it was a long-term, large study, and it showed that the more fiber people ate, the more likely they were to die of a heart attack or a stroke. So I don't think you need fiber. There's also other studies that show a strong correlation between increased fiber and increased bowel motions and colon disease called diverticulosis. So, does this help you? Why would it help you? It's something that we can't absorb, we can't utilize, and is difficult for us to process. No animal eats things that they can't digest. Why would they? Right? Why would you eat something if you can't even use it or digest it? The animals that eat fiber can use fiber. We can't, so we shouldn't be using it. There are no animals that I know of that eat fiber that cannot process fiber at all, right? It just doesn't exist. So I don't think that's something that we should eat. As to the microbiome, well, that's simple. There are studies with the Inuit that actually show that just eating meat gives you the best microbiome you could possibly get. So so just eat meat. If you're eating what you're designed to eat, your body's going to work the way it's designed to work. We have a symbiotic relationship with these microbes. Our oral biome, our gut biome, these are all things that we've been living with as a species forever. And so what you eat, your biome eats. Your oral biome eats, and if you're eating just meat, if you're eating what you're supposed to eat, you're going to have healthy white teeth that don't get cavities, don't get rot. And that's why animals in the wild don't rot out their teeth. The Maasai and the Native Americans, the Native Australians, when Westerners came there, and there's all these accounts of these very dark skinned people with bright white teeth. They don't have toothbrushes. They don't have dentists, certainly not in the 1600s. And yet, why did they still have their teeth? Why is it that before the agricultural revolution, sometimes the only remains of a skeleton that you had was the teeth, and they were perfectly formed, no cavities, no problems. Then 10,000 years ago, hard line, the skeletons and the teeth of the skeletons were rotten, misformed, crooked, and diseased, right? Because you're eating something you're not supposed to eat. You're going to cultivate bacteria that you're not supposed to cultivate, and it's going to damage your enamel. It's going to damage your teeth. Same thing goes for your gut. If you're eating what you're supposed to eat, you're going to have the gut biome that you're supposed to have, as evidenced by the Inuit, who are eating if they're eating only meat, they have the gut biome they're supposed to have, and that makes sense because what we are supposed to eat, that's going to feed our gut biome, and if that is indeed our optimal diet, we should get our optimal microbiome from that, and we do.
Well, let's break into the meat. I think that's great, and I personally have experienced long stretches of carnivore, and it is the best that I've felt. And there has been no constipation ever when I have gone on large time periods of strictly carnivore. So I can attest to that. And the fiber things just read the literature. I mean, it's there. It's not really that hidden if you try to look. On meat, so we are an agrarian state. We are home to Tyson, so chicken central. And I really want to understand that chicken component from where you are, and then go into how you would rank the meat, please. I have come to the conclusion I feel like eggs and bone broth are like superfoods, but that chicken muscle meat is not. I don't even
Mhm.
know that we should be eating it. And so I really wanted you to go into that from your perspective. And should we be eating chicken?
Well, it it's not as ideal as other things, especially like the ruminant animals, like the ruminant meat, like cows and bison or venison, sheep, things like that. And that's actually something that Dr. Salisbury noticed in the 1800s was that beef was a number one, lamb was a distant second. So if you're going to eat red meat, you want to go for beef. So they sort of rank that out. If you go down and look at the nutritional rankings of these things, they are very different. And then, but a bigger difference comes from how that animal was raised. And so a big problem with chickens these days is that they're fed a lot of things that they didn't grow up eating, that they're not designed to eat. And so the monogastrics, the things there's only one stomach. Obviously, the ruminants have like four barrel chamber stomachs, and they can deal with things that they weren't necessarily designed to eat as well. So, and I even saw a report or an article saying that they could process and excrete glyphosate, like the Roundup sort of Roundup herbicide, right? So it was, it was probably really bad for us. And it seems that if cows eat that, they can actually detoxify it and eliminate it, and so it doesn't get in the meat. Whereas other animals, it can, or at least that's suggested that they can. So chickens are sort of in that category. There's monogastric that they're getting fed chicken or corn and soy, and that's not what they're designed to eat. And so, soy can have a whole bunch of things that they're not supposed to have. They have a lot of linoleic acid and omega-6s, which you need some of. It's an essential nutrient, but you only need a small amount of it, and more than that can cause significant harm. And so a lot of indigenous populations that are lean and strong and have very low rates of disease, they seem to have linoleic acid consumption that doesn't go above 2%, and that seems to be pretty consistent in these populations. Even if they eat a varied diet, either very heavily meat based, very very fat based, maybe coconut milk and things like that, or even tribe in Papua New Guinea that actually ate a lot of yams. Obviously, not their native cuisine, because that's a new world plant that got taken there by the Europeans, but they still had a very low level of omega-6s, and they had a low rate of disease as well. So interesting. But in any case, when animals are being fed something they're not designed to eat, and they're being fed a bunch of plants that they're not designed to eat in particular, they're going to build up things that aren't necessarily supposed to be there either. So chicken and pork, and even fish that are fed grains and soy and corn and things like that, they'll build up a lot of linoleic acid in their fat. So they'll have a high omega-6 content in their fat. And then we eat their fat, and it's like we're eating those seed oils by proxy. So that can be a problem. Eggs are fantastic. I mean, I would agree they're like a superfood that has all the building blocks and nutrients that you need to form a new life. And so obviously that's all the building blocks for life. It's a perfect protein. It has all the amino acids in the right proportions that we need them. But again, depending on what the chicken is fed, that egg is going to be better or worse for you. So I can't remember the gentleman's name, but he does like a lot of big regenerative farming in America, and he was talking about the average USDA egg is reported to have about 41 milligrams of folate. But his regeneratively raised, pasture-raised chickens had over 1,000 milligrams of folate. So massive difference, really, 20, 25 times the amount of at least that micronutrient. And we do know that grass-fed and finished, regeneratively raised cows have 4 to 5 times the amount of micronutrients than just Safeway beef would. But at the same time, Safeway beef is great. It has everything you need, really in the proportion that you need it, and most people will do fabulously well on that. And so I would sort of rank it like that. I'd have your ruminants up at the top for sure, because they can weed out and eliminate out more of these plant toxins and industrial toxins that we don't want. So they're a great filter for us. And then you get down into the monogastrics, like pork, chicken, eggs, and fish, wild caught fish. Now, if those are pasture raised, sort of raised in their natural environment, and wild caught fish, those are much better. I would still rank ruminants above that, though. And then below all that would be the factory farmed chicken and pork and eggs, and just never eat farmed fish. I just never eat those. Those are not good for you. And dairy is great, but some people can have a problem with it because the casein can be pro-inflammatory. So especially people with autoimmune issues and inflammatory diseases, they tend to need to avoid things like dairy just because they're a bit more inflammatory as well.
I'm glad you threw in the dairy. I should have asked about that. I do think there's a considerable difference between raw and pasteurized and commercial dairy
Oh,
there
yeah.
too, for everybody. But you brought up folate specifically, and so I wanted to get your opinion on. So, what I have got multiple MTHFR gene variations, and so I'm going.
Okay.
Since I do, I know my son does, right? And so we have that whole cancer play there, and knowing that like his formula we had, because I didn't know anything going into this, the rice cereal that he had, all the fortified crap, we were pouring folic acid in him, right? So the synthetic version of folate that we are told to prevent spina bifida and all these neural defects. I now know that I was poisoning him by putting that in there. What I have also heard is I believe like Dave Asprey and Paul Saladino also have the MTHFR gene variation. And so I'm putting that together. And then if you take like what Chris Masterjohn says about it's a riboflavin deficiency, how do we make sure that we get the adequate B vitamins, and how are people with this MTHFR gene variations doing on carnivore, especially long term?
Yeah. Yeah, very good question. I mean, that's one thing when people ask me what they should test and things like that on a carnivore diet, usually nothing unless you have a problem. But one thing I do think is valuable is checking for folate. And if you don't know if you're MTHFR, if you do know you're MTHFR, then you will need more folate. But not everybody knows that. And so check your folate. If that's low and you've just been eating a lot of red meat, then okay, well, for whatever reason, you're not getting enough. And but the simple solution is you just eat liver a couple times a week because there's a lot more liver in or a lot more folate in liver, and so that's basically supplements for carnivores is just a bit of organs because those are so nutrient dense that that can actually be a problem if you eat too much of these things. You can actually get an overload of the fat soluble vitamins or metals such as copper and the fat soluble vitamins such as vitamin A. So you can actually get a problem with that. So you still want to keep it in proportion. You still don't want to overdo it. Still remember that if you go hunting and you take down a buffalo, it has meat on it that's going to last you 2 years and it has one liver, right? So just to keep that in mind, I mean, not everybody needs that. Most people don't. I mean, I've eaten liver, I think the count is 6 times in the last decade. So not that much, and I've been carnivore for 6 years now, and my folate's fine, but not everyone's is. And so if you're in that category, if you have the MTHFR, you're going to be in that category. You need to eat liver, not even all that much, just a bit, 2 to 3 times a week. Just have that in your diet, and you should be fine. And so the people that I've seen that have had problems and realized that they were low folate. They just added in chicken liver or beef liver. Some like to avoid or mix it up because beef liver can have a lot of copper, and so maybe they'll have beef liver sometimes, and they'll just use chicken liver other times. But just having some sort of animal liver 2 to 3 times a week takes care of that. I mean, you should be able to get everything you need just from eating meat. That's what we're designed for. We're not eating wild animals anymore. The equivalent would be, getting venison or a regeneratively raised grass-fed and finished cow, which will have a lot more folate in it, just like, the eggs that we were talking about before, 20 some times the amount of folate in it. So you're going to be fine if you're eating that sort of natural thing. Not everyone has access to that. Most people don't. And so if you don't, you just go to the next bar up, which is organs.
Awesome, great. And then a convenience there. Are you kind of pro or anti the desiccated organs?
Well, if people need them, and I mean, they should just sort of get used to or learn how to cook liver. Like it's just it's easier. It's a lot cheaper, and it actually doesn't taste bad. I've noticed it's sort of like seared ahi. Like if you just sear liver real quick, and keep it raw in the middle, it's delicious. It's so much better. I actually like it. It actually tastes good. But if it's cooked all the way through, no, thank you. I don't need that shoe leather. But if you just sear the outside and keep the inside raw, it actually tastes good. I did some things where I took like strips of liver, very thin, and I put a bit of salt on it, put it on drying racks because I like to dry out my steaks. It sort of concentrates the flavor, helps them brown better. And so I got some liver once, and I was like, let's try it with that. The next day, they sort of dried out a bit, and the salt soaked in. I was like, well, that actually tastes good. And I had like a whole tray of it, so I sort of had a bit every day. After about 4 days, they turned like a lot more dry and sort of gummy. They had like the consistency of like a gummy bear. And like that was something that I sort of missed, was that tactile sort of gummy candy sort of thing. And all of a sudden I had this like meat gummy. And I'm like, this is awesome. And I was like, I just loved them. And actually I was just like, this is good. And I just like ate a bunch of them. But you know, your body even tells you, your body sort of tells you they taste really good because your body wants those nutrients. But eventually your body just says, yeah, okay, that's enough. And I just naturally stopped. So I had like sort of 4 pieces, and that was it. But so there are things you can do. And I think it's best if you do it like that. But if you can't do that and you're just really fighting against it, and you are MTHFR or you're a bit deficient for another reason, then yeah, you could do the desiccated liver. But I think it's if you're able to sort of just eat it, I think it's best to just eat it.
I think that's fair. That's a great answer. One thing I've noticed with like the meat based diet, the carnivore, is that there's almost a consciousness that goes around it being more connected to food. And I don't know if that's just because we are relying on another living, a sentient being there, but we have gone down to White Oak Pastures and filmed a documentary with Will Harris, and actually Will's coming on the podcast tomorrow. The
Nice.
support for regenerative agriculture by the carnivore community is a beautiful, beautiful thing that I am really hoping that we can keep that train going. It's like what you went up and did. I believe her name was Maggie
Mm.
up in Canada. Like that was a mind blowing story. Like that was so cool.
Mm.
How how do you feel we can keep pushing that on? And why is that just so important? But because it surely is to me and our audience, but why is it important to you or for you to see that regenerative movement continue?
Well, for a lot of reasons. One, it is better for the animals. It gives them a better life, and you know we're sort of having a trade. We take care of them, they take care of us, and that's how that works. You want to give them a good life and a nice sort of more natural life. We protect them from the elements, we protect them from predators, and we have them doing what they're supposed to do, which is being out in grass meadows and being with other cows and making more cows. And but also it makes the meat more nutritious. It's a better way of being a steward of the land. You're not stripping nutrients out of the land. You're actually putting nutrients back in the land, and that actually helps the growth cycle. So more grass grows. That makes longer root stock for the grass, and then so they cycle around in different pastures, and they come back, and it's grown even more. Alan Savory has actually shown that you can reverse deserts by doing this, moving animals through bunched and moving like a migrating herd of animals, and it puts things back in the land and makes it more fertile, more verdant. Plants and animals are the environment, and you need these things living in symbiosis, and you start taking one out of the other and changing something, and you can damage the earth. So I think it's important from that standpoint. I think it's important from animal welfare point of view, from our point of view, getting more nutrition, and also because we want this to be sustainable. We want this to actually benefit the planet. We don't want to just drag things down, which is the direction we're going now with large monocrop agriculture. It is actually its days are numbered. Unfortunately, it's damaging the land. We're losing 27.5 billion tons of topsoil a year. That's a vanishing resource. It takes 500 years to grow a centimeter of that, and we're losing an area the size of Kentucky every single year with our current farming practices. We till up a whole field, and the rain washes most of it away, and the wind blows a lot of it away. This is what happened in the Dust Bowl era in America. It almost turned the middle of America into another Sahara desert, and that's because of our farming practices. And thankfully, we recognized what was going on. We were able to sort of stop it, but that is what can happen. The Sahara Desert actually is a man-made desert, and I think that was from agriculture back in the ancient world. The pyramids and the Sphinx they took soil samples in the 90s and realized, wow, these weren't desert people. These were actually built in jungles. These were jungle pyramids. That's a jungle Sphinx, and now it's a desert. Mesopotamia, the Persian Empire. You read accounts of the Persian Empire, Gilgamesh, the oldest ever written epic that we have, that describes an area of green, lush grass fields with deer and antelope and all these different sorts of animals and cedar forests and all these sorts of things. That's in modern day Iraq, right? So that's where agriculture was first invented, and it actually strips the land and loses topsoil and causes deserts. Animals reverse that. So if we want to be as healthy as we possibly can, we need animals, and we need to do it right. We need to do it in a way that helps the land. It doesn't hurt the land. The great thing about animals as well is that you can do it on any land. You can do it in the mountains. You can do it in forests. You can do it in rangeland. You can't grow crops in those areas. You can only grow crops on arable land, which is only 4% of the Earth's surface, including oceans, obviously. Not that much. So rangeland and forest land make up another 25% or so of the Earth's surface, not including oceans. So the majority of land on Earth is rangeland, forest land. You can run animals through all of that. You don't have to clear it to make a field. You can just have animals go through in this natural environment and make that natural environment better. So in order to support a growing population and support it well, and to make people healthy and to make the land healthy and the animals healthy and everything healthy and better, you need to go to regenerative methods. And I think that model is the best to meet all of those demands.
Thank you for that. I agree wholeheartedly, my friend. Thank you for the work that you're putting out. Thank you for you're in Australia right now in the middle of the night, and you jumped on here with me. Appreciate your time, your wisdom. Where can we send people to help benefit you, and what's next for you?
Well, thank you very much for having me. I appreciate it. It was good to meet you. So thank you for having me on. Well, I have social media. I'm on Instagram. It's just Anthony Chaffee MD, and I have a YouTube channel by the same description, Anthony Chaffee MD, and I put out a lot of videos, at least once a week, if not more. And I have a sort of a back catalog and everything like that. And I have a podcast just called The Plant Free MD, and that sort of tells everybody not only how to do carnivore, but why we should do carnivore, why it's important, why it helps us, the science behind it. I speak with people like Professor Seifried and other top researchers and scientists in various fields that I think all add to the story of what we really should be eating and why. And so I go through that in the podcast and on the YouTube channel as well. And Twitter, Anthony_Chaffee, and other sort of little things, but people can find me through those other means of social media. I'm on Rumble as well.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, it's all amazing resources. You've added so much value. You staying in Australia, or are you coming back to States?
I think eventually I'll come back to the States. The more I travel, the more I appreciate it in America. So, it's fun here, and I really like it, and I like my work that I'm doing here. But America is my home. It's always going to be my home. I have my family's been in America since the 1500s, so it's just like that's where I'm from. I've got founding fathers on both sides. I've got both sides have people on the Mayflower and ancestors and things like that, and so that's my home. And so I want to go and live in my home, be around my family, and there are weird things happening. And I also sort of feel a duty to get back and maybe, help out and make it not go to hell like people are trying to do.
Amen. That is why we are sitting here, my friend. It's what you just said there in those last few seconds is exactly what the mission that we're on is all about, buddy. Thank you so much.
No problem. Thank you for having me.
Again, the podcast is one of my favorite things in that I get to meet with people like Dr. Chaffee. I think that these wisdom, the different views, something to just give us something to talk about, to think about and question. That way it can sow prosperity in our own lives, in our own communities, based on just questioning and the cause and effect. So please check out, like, share, subscribe, do all the things to help get the Sowing Prosperity message out.
Thank you for listening to the Sowing Prosperity podcast. We hope that you have learned something new and that you are inspired to adopt regenerative practices in your community. Remember that by working together, we can create a sustainable and abundant future for ourselves and for future generations.